The old Victorian on Hemlock Street had been on the market for a year. To most, it was a white elephant, too big, too old, too full of the quiet echoes of the past. But for me, Liam, a freelance graphic designer seeking cheap rent and solitude, and for Sarah, a graduate student buried in textbooks, it was a perfect, if temporary, solution. We found the listing on the same day, responded with identical desperation, and after a brief, awkward meeting with the landlord, became housemates by necessity. The house was a giant, breathing creature of worn oak floors and floral wallpaper that was slowly losing its grip on the walls. Our agreement was unspoken but absolute. We would share the space, but not our lives. The ground floor was common territory, a kitchen with a stove that hissed like a dragon, a living room with a gargantuan fireplace, and a dining room we never used. The second floor was the DMZ. My bedroom and office were on the east side. Hers were on the west. The long, carpeted hallway between them felt like a neutral country we both avoided invading. Our routines were a perfectly choreographed ballet of avoidance. I'd hear her leave for the library at 7 a.m. The soft click of the front door was my alarm. I'd work in my office, the only sounds the hum of my computer and the occasional scuffling of squirrels in the attic. She'd return in the evening, the smell of microwave dinner soon wafting from the kitchen. Sometimes we'd pass each other in the hallway, offering tight, polite smiles, the kind you give a stranger in an elevator. Hey, hi! And then the soft thud of our respective doors. Months passed in this quiet rhythm. I knew she was studying marine biology because I'd seen the textbooks. She probably knew I designed websites from the snippets of client calls she might have overheard. That was the extent of our knowledge. We were two satellites in a shared orbit, close enough to observe, but never close enough to collide. The change began subtly, a week before the storm. The weather turned oppressive, the air thick and heavy. The old house seemed to groan under the pressure. One evening, I found a note on the fridge, written in a neat, looping script. Liam, the faucet in the main bathroom is dripping. I tightened it, but it didn't help. Sarah. It was the first personal communication we'd had in weeks. I scribbled back, I'll take a look, thanks. The next day, I was hauling groceries in when the sky opened up. I was drenched by the time I got to the porch. Sarah was coming out, saw me, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. Instead of the usual quick glance away, she offered a small, genuine smile. You're gonna need a bigger boat, she said. Nodding at the downpour dot, I laughed, surprised. It was the first time I'd heard her make a joke. Tell me about it. That small crack in the ice was all it took. The following evening, as a pre-storm wind rattled the window panes, I was making a pot of coffee. She came into the kitchen, looking tired. Long day? I asked, the question feeling foreign on my tongue. The worst? She sighed, leaning against the counter. Trying to identify plankton from blurry photographs? It's about as exciting as it sounds. I'll take your blurry plankton over a client who wants his logo to pop more but also be more serene any day. I offered. She laughed. A real warm sound that seemed to fight back the gloom of the house. Deal. We took our mugs into the living room, a territory we'd never shared outside of a passing moment. We talked for an hour. I learned she was from a small coastal town in Maine and missed the ocean. She learned I'd moved from Chicago, chasing quiet after a bad breakup. It wasn't a deep or profound conversation, but it was human. It was connection. The following day, the day the storm was due to hit, the tension was palpable. The weather reports were apocalyptic. Schools were closed, businesses were shuttered. The governor declared a state of emergency. By noon, the sky was a sickly, bruised green. Sarah and I moved through the house in a new, unspoken alliance, preparing. We filled bathtubs with water, gathered flashlights and candles, and moved the porch furniture into the garage. The quiet between us was no longer awkward, but companionable. A shared focus on a common threat. When the storm hit, it was with biblical fury. It wasn't just rain. It was a solid wall of water slammed against the house by shrieking winds. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died with a final, soft pop, plunging us into a deep, roaring darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path through the black. "Sarah," I called out, "in here." Her voice came from the living room. I found her by the large bay window, her face illuminated by a single candle she'd lit on the mantelpiece. She was staring out into the maelstrom, her arms wrapped around herself. "This is insane," I said, my voice barely rising above the howl of the wind. "The eye of the hurricane is calmer." "You know," she said, not turning around. "It's the quiet, peaceful center, but it's a trap. Because the other side of the wall is coming, and it's always worse." A tremendous crack echoed from outside, followed by a shuddering impact that shook the very foundations of the house. We both flinched. Then came a new sound, a groaning, tearing noise from directly above us. "The attic," we said in unison. A gust of wind ripped through the hallway upstairs, and a spray of cold rain followed it down. The storm had breached us. A window had broken, or part of the roof had torn away. "The water will ruin everything." Sarah shouted, her graduate work, her laptop, all of it stored in her room on the west side, directly below the attic. Without a word, we became a team. I grabbed a tarp and a toolbox from the basement. She held the flashlight. We fought our way up the stairs against the wind that howled down the hallway. The door to the attic stairs, usually latched shut, was swinging wildly. A tempest of wind and rain poured down from the darkness above. "I'll go up," I yelled. "You hold the light and brace the door." It was a mad, desperate struggle. The attic was a chaos of flying insulation and horizontal rain. I could barely see, barely breathe. I crawled towards the source of the blast, a section of the roof where a tree limb had punched through the old shingles. I fought to unfold the tarp, my hands numb and slipping. Sarah held the door with all her strength, the beam of the flashlight a steady, unwavering lighthouse in the chaos. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to secure the tarp with a handful of nails, creating a makeshift patch. The rain lessened to a drip. I crawled back, soaked, freezing, and covered in grime, and tumbled down the attic stairs. Sarah helped me pull the door shut and latch it, finally cutting off the storm's direct assault. We stood there in the dark hallway, panting, dripping onto the carpet. The storm still raged outside, but the immediate danger inside had passed. We were both shivering, adrenaline coursing through us. "Your hands are bleeding," she said softly, taking my hand in hers. In the dim light from the candle she'd left downstairs, I saw the cuts and scrapes from the frantic work. "It's nothing," I said, but I didn't pull my hand away. Her touch was warm, an anchor in the madness. We went back downstairs to the living room. The fireplace was our only hope for warmth. I found some old newspaper and kindling, and soon a small, defiant fire was crackling in the hearth. We sat on the floor before it, wrapped in blankets, our shoulders touching for warmth and comfort. The house continued to groan around us, but the fire created a small circle of light and safety. We talked, not about the storm or the house, but about everything we'd avoided for months. She told me about her father, a fisherman lost at sea, and why the ocean was both a calling and a ghost for her. I told her about my dream of starting my own design studio, a dream I buried under a mountain of safe. Freelance work, the storm and its violent fury, had stripped away the walls we had both so carefully built, not just the walls of the house, but the walls around ourselves. In the flickering firelight, Sarah wasn't just my quiet, studious housemate. She was a person of profound strength and quiet sadness. An eye in her eyes was no longer just the reclusive guy from the East Wing dot as the wind finally began to subside. Shifting from a scream to a mournful sigh, a new quiet settled over the house. This quiet was different. It wasn't the quiet of isolation, but the quiet of aftermath, a shared survival. I looked at her, her face glowing in the firelight, and she looked back at me. There was no need for words. The space between us closed not with a sudden rush, but with a gentle, inevitable certainty. Our lips met, a kiss that tasted of rain and wood smoke and a long, quiet loneliness finally coming to an end. The storm had passed. In its wake, it had left a damaged house, a world without power, and the shattered remains of our old, quiet life. But as we sat together, watching the embers of the fire die down, listening to the first tentative chirps of birds greeting the dawn, I knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. And for the first time in a very long time, the change felt like a beginning. The quiet house on Hemlock Street was no longer just a shared space. It was a home, and its story was just starting.